Vitold Pelecki, the volunteer who entered hell. Imagine voluntarily walking into the most horrific place humanity has ever created, not as a liberator, not as an observer, but as a prisoner. You allow yourself to be captured by the Nazis, knowing they will send you to Auschwitz, the death camp where over 1 million people would be murdered. You spend 2.5 years as prisoner 4859, witnessing unimaginable horrors, suffering brutal beatings, watching friends die. But you don't just survive. You organize a secret resistance network of hundreds of prisoners. You smuggle out detailed reports about the gas chambers, the mass murders, the systematic extermination of Jews. You beg the Allies to bomb the camp, even if it means killing you in the process. They ignore you. So you escape, crawling under barbed wire, running through German patrols, fighting your way to freedom. You survive the war. And then your own government, the communist regime that took over Poland, arrests you, tortures you, puts you on a sham trial, and executes you with a bullet to the back of the head. This is not fiction. This is the true story of Witold Pelecki, a Polish cavalry officer whose courage was so extraordinary that Poland's chief rabbi said, "When God created the human being, God had in mind that we should all be like Captain Witold Pelecki." By the end of this video, you'll discover why Witold volunteered for certain death, how he organized resistance in hell itself, why the world refused to believe his reports, and how a hero was erased from history for 40 years. Stay with me, because Witold Pelecki's story will challenge everything you think you know about bravery and sacrifice. Part 1. The Making of a Patriot. Childhood and Early Life. The story of Witold Pelecki begins on May 13, 1901 in a place that no longer exists on Polish maps, Olonets, a small town in Karelia, deep in the Russian Empire. Witold wasn't born in Poland because Poland didn't exist. It had been erased from the map, partitioned between Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Witold's family had been forcibly resettled to Karelia by Tsarist Russian authorities as punishment for participating in the January uprising of 1863, a failed Polish rebellion against Russian rule. The Pelecki family lived in exile, far from their homeland, but they never forgot who they were. They were Polish, they were Catholic, and they would never stop fighting for Poland's freedom. Witold's father, Julian, worked as a forester. His mother, Ludwika, raised the children with fierce patriotism and deep Catholic faith. From his earliest memories, Witold was taught that service to Poland was the highest calling, that honor mattered more than life, and that tyranny must always be resisted. In 1910, when Witold was 9 years old, the family moved to Vilno, now known as Vilnius, Lithuania. There, Witold joined the secret ZHP Scouts organization. In Russian-controlled territory, Polish scouting was illegal, so the Scouts operated in secret, teaching boys survival skills, patriotism, and military tactics. Then came World War I. In 1918, as the war ended and empires collapsed, Poland had a chance to reclaim its independence. The teenage Witold, only 17 years old, joined Polish self-defense units and helped disarm German retreating troops. It was his first taste of combat, and he was fearless. When the Polish-Soviet War erupted in 1919, Witold immediately volunteered. He joined the cavalry and fought against the Bolsheviks, who were trying to export communist revolution into Poland. Witold's scout section was overrun during one battle, but he survived. On August 5, 1920, he joined the 211th Ulan Regiment and fought in the Battle of Warsaw, a critical Polish victory that stopped the Soviet advance. Witold had proven himself as a warrior. But when the war ended, he didn't seek glory or a military career. He simply wanted to live a quiet life. Part 2. The Farmer and Family Man. Between the Wars. After the Polish-Soviet War, Witold settled in the town of Lida, in what was then eastern Poland. He attended university briefly, but left to manage his family's estate, Cukurcze. Witold became a farmer, working the land, raising livestock, and living simply. In 1931, he married Maria Ostrowska, a local schoolteacher. They had 2 children, a son, Andrzej, and a daughter, Zofia. Witold was a devoted father and husband. He painted watercolors, wrote poetry, and enjoyed the peaceful rhythms of rural life. But Witold never stopped preparing for war. He created a dairy cooperative to help local farmers. He established a volunteer fire brigade and served as its president. And most importantly, he organized a cavalry unit called Krakusy, a military training group that prepared young men for combat. Witold knew that Poland's peace wouldn't last forever. By 1939, Witold had been promoted to cavalry captain. When Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland in September 1939, launching World War II, Witold immediately mobilized his Krakusy cavalry unit. They fought as cavalry support for the 19th Infantry Division, engaging German forces at Piotrków Trybunalski and Tomaszów Mazowiecki. The Polish army was overwhelmed. The Germans attacked from the west with tanks and aircraft. The Soviets attacked from the east. Within weeks, Poland was crushed. Witold's division was shattered. He managed to reach Warsaw, where he witnessed the city's destruction. But he refused to surrender. If Poland couldn't win through conventional warfare, then he would fight another way. Vitaly Pelecki joined the Polish underground resistance. Part 3. The Birth of a Mission. The Secret Polish Army and Auschwitz. On November 9, 1939, Witold Pelecki and his commander Jan Wlodarczyk founded the Secret Polish Army, Tajemna Armia Polska, or TAP. It was one of the first resistance organizations in occupied Poland, dedicated to sabotage, intelligence gathering, and preparing for an eventual uprising. But by mid-1940, disturbing rumors reached the Polish resistance. The Germans had established a new concentration camp in southern Poland near the town of Oświęcim, which the Germans called Auschwitz. Thousands of Polish political prisoners, intellectuals, and resistance members were being arrested and sent there, and none of them were coming back. The resistance knew almost nothing about what was happening inside Auschwitz. They had no intelligence, no contacts, no information. Prisoners were disappearing into the camp and vanishing forever. Major Wlodarczyk called a meeting of his officers. He explained the problem. They needed someone to infiltrate Auschwitz, organize a resistance network inside the camp, gather intelligence, and send reports back to Warsaw. It was a suicide mission. Whomever volunteered would likely never come out alive. Major Wlodarczyk looked at Witold Pelecki, and Witold understood. He was 39 years old, married with 2 young children. He could have refused. He could have argued that he was more valuable outside the camp, but that wasn't who Witold Pelecki was. "I will do it," Witold said simply. His plan was audacious. During one of the regular German roundups in Warsaw, where the Gestapo would arrest random civilians off the street, Witold would deliberately allow himself to be captured. He would use a false identity, Tomasz Serafiński, a tanner by profession. With no connection to the military or resistance, he would be sent to Auschwitz as just another anonymous prisoner. On September 19, 1940, Witold said goodbye to his wife and children. He told Maria that he was going on a dangerous mission, but he couldn't tell her where. She begged him not to go. He kissed her one last time and left. That afternoon, Witold positioned himself in the Żoliborz neighborhood of Warsaw, where he knew a German roundup was taking place. The Gestapo swept through the streets, kicking in doors, dragging people from their homes. Witold stood in the open and allowed himself to be captured. He was beaten, shoved into a truck with about 2,000 other terrified civilians, and taken to the Light Horse Guards barracks. For 2 days, prisoners were brutalized. Guards beat them with rubber batons. Many died. The survivors were loaded onto trains. On the night of September 21st to 22nd, 1940, Witold Pelecki arrived at Auschwitz. He was registered as prisoner number 4859. Witold had voluntarily entered hell. Part 4. The First Days in Hell. Initial Horrors of Auschwitz. The moment Witold stepped off the train at Auschwitz, he was beaten. Guards with clubs and whips screamed at the prisoners, hitting them, driving them forward. Men who moved too slowly were beaten to death on the spot. The prisoners were lined up and forced to stand at attention for hours. Guards walked among them, beating anyone who moved, who flinched, who showed any sign of weakness. Witold watched men collapse from exhaustion and be clubbed to death where they fell. Then came the welcome speech from the camp commandant. He told the prisoners, "You are now in a concentration camp. You will work until you die. There is only one way out of Auschwitz, through the chimney." The prisoners were stripped naked. Their heads were shaved, and they were tattooed with identification numbers. We told became 4859. Not a name, a number. They were given striped prisoner uniforms that were too small or too large, thin and filthy, offering no protection from the cold. The first night, prisoners were packed into barracks designed for 200 men, but holding over 1,000. There was no room to lie down. Men stood pressed against each other, suffocating, trying to survive the night. The next morning, the real horror began. Guards woke the prisoners before dawn with screams and beatings. Anyone who didn't move fast enough was beaten or shot. Prisoners were forced into work details, digging ditches, hauling rocks, building structures. The work was pointless, designed only to exhaust and break the prisoners. We told watched men die every day. Some were beaten to death by guards. Some collapsed from exhaustion and were left to die in the mud. Some were shot for imaginary infractions. The death toll was staggering. In those early months, hundreds of prisoners died every week. But we told didn't break. He observed everything. He memorized the layout of the camp. He identified which guards were the cruelest. He watched how the camp operated, and he began recruiting. Part 5. Building the Resistance, the secret network inside Auschwitz. We told's mission was to organize a resistance network inside Auschwitz, and he set to work immediately. It was incredibly dangerous. If the guards discovered what he was doing, he would be tortured and executed. But we told was careful. He started by identifying prisoners he could trust, Polish political prisoners, former soldiers, men of strong character who hadn't been broken by the camp. He approached them carefully, speaking in coded language, revealing his true identity only to those he was certain he could trust. The resistance organization he built was called ZOW, Związek Organizacji Wojskowej, or Union of Military Organization. By late 1940, ZOW had recruited dozens of members. By 1941, it had hundreds. At its peak, the network included nearly 1,000 prisoners across multiple camp sections. ZOW had multiple objectives: raise morale by spreading news from outside the camp, steal food and medicine to keep prisoners alive, sabotage German operations when possible, gather intelligence about the camp's operations, prepare for a potential uprising if Allied forces ever attacked the camp from the outside. But most importantly, ZOW had to get information out of Auschwitz and into the hands of the Allies. We told developed a system. Prisoners who were being released, either because their sentences ended or through bribes, were given memorized reports or hidden written documents. These prisoners traveled to Warsaw and delivered the information to the Home Army Resistance headquarters. From Warsaw, the reports were sent to the Polish government in exile in London, which shared them with the British and the Americans. We told's first report left Auschwitz in October 1940, carried by a released prisoner named Alexander Wielopolski. It described the brutal conditions, the systematic murders, the abuse. It reached London in March 1941. But no one believed it. Part 6. Witnessing the Holocaust, the gas chambers and mass murder. In 1941, Auschwitz began to change. What had started as a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners was transforming into something far worse, a death camp. In July 1942, the first Jewish transports arrived from Slovakia. We told watched as families were unloaded from cattle cars, separated into groups, and marched towards new buildings at the far end of the camp complex. These buildings had tall chimneys that belched black smoke day and night. We told learned the truth. The Germans had built gas chambers. They were murdering thousands of people every day. Men, women, children.
Entire families were being herded into rooms disguised as showers, the doors were sealed, and poison gas was released. Within minutes, everyone inside was dead. Then their bodies were burned in massive crematoria. Witold was horrified. He had witnessed brutality and murder, but this was different. This was industrial-scale genocide. The Nazis weren't just killing prisoners, they were exterminating an entire people. Witold smuggled out detailed reports describing the gas chambers, the crematoria, the selections where prisoners were divided into those who could work and those who would be killed immediately. He estimated that the 3 crematoria in Auschwitz II could incinerate 8,000 bodies per day. He sent report after report begging the Allies to act. He proposed multiple plans. Bomb the camp and the railway lines leading to it. Drop weapons so the prisoners could fight back. Send Polish paratroopers from Britain to attack the camp from the outside while prisoners revolted from within. Every report was ignored. The British and Americans believed Witold's descriptions were exaggerated propaganda. They couldn't imagine that the Nazis were capable of such systematic evil. Witold was desperate. He was watching the greatest crime in human history unfold before his eyes, and the world refused to believe him. Part 7. The Escape. Breaking Out of Auschwitz. By early 1943, Vitaly Pelecki realized that his mission inside Auschwitz had reached its limit. The Gestapo had infiltrated the resistance network, killing many of his key members. The Germans were tightening security, making it harder to smuggle out reports. And Witold's health was failing. He had survived 2.5 years in conditions that killed most men within months, but his body was breaking down. Most importantly, Witold believed that if he could escape and personally brief the Home Army leadership in Warsaw, he could convince them to support an uprising in Auschwitz. He was certain that if he could tell them face to face what was happening, they would act. On the night of April 26 to 27, 1943, Witold and 2 other prisoners, Jan Redje and Edward Sizelski, executed a daring escape plan. They had been assigned to a work detail at a warehouse outside the main camp perimeter. At a prearranged moment, they overpowered a guard, stole keys, and cut through the barbed wire. They ran. German guards fired at them. Search dogs were released. Sirens wailed. But Witold and his companions had planned their route carefully. They made it to the Sola River, crossed it, and disappeared into the countryside.
Part 8. The Bitter Truth. Reports Ignored, Warsaw Uprising, and Betrayal. Witold immediately wrote a comprehensive report, over 100 pages, detailing everything he had witnessed in Auschwitz. He described the gas chambers, the mass murders, the systematic extermination of Jews. He urged the Allies to bomb the camp immediately. The Home Army commanders read his report, and they rejected his proposal for an uprising. They explained that the Home Army didn't have enough weapons or soldiers to attack Auschwitz from outside. They said that any uprising inside the camp would be suicide. They believed the Allies would eventually liberate the camp when they defeated Germany. Witold was devastated. He had risked everything, spent 2.5 years in hell, and now his own side refused to act. But Witold didn't give up. In August 1944, when the Warsaw Uprising erupted, Witold immediately volunteered to fight. For 63 days, Polish resistance fighters battled German forces in the streets of Warsaw. Witold fought as a common soldier, not revealing his rank until many officers were killed and he was needed for command. The Warsaw Uprising was crushed. Over 200,000 Polish civilians were killed. The Germans systematically destroyed the city, block by block. Witold was captured and sent to a German prisoner of war camp. He survived until the war ended in May 1945. But Poland's nightmare wasn't over. The Soviets occupied Poland and installed a communist government. Poland had been liberated from the Nazis only to fall under Soviet tyranny. Witold refused to accept it. He remained loyal to the Polish government in exile in London.
In 1945, he was asked to return to Poland and gather intelligence on the Soviet occupation. Witold agreed. It was a death sentence. Part 9. Betrayed and Executed. Communist Murder of a Hero. Witold returned to Poland in late 1945, operating under a false identity. He gathered intelligence on communist crimes, Soviet exploitation of Poland's economy, and the brutal suppression of opposition. He sent regular reports to the Polish government in exile. But the communist secret police, the UB, were hunting for him. Witold's intelligence network was infiltrated. On May 8, 1947, Witold Pelecki was arrested. He was taken to Mokotów prison in Warsaw, where political prisoners were tortured and executed. For months, the UB interrogated Witold, beating him, depriving him of sleep, torturing him. They wanted him to confess to being a Western spy, to planning assassinations, to working for foreign powers. Witold was put on trial in March 1948. The trial was a sham. Witold was not allowed to testify in his own defense. No defending witnesses were called. The verdict was predetermined. Guilty. On May 25, 1948, at approximately 9 p.m., Witold Pelecki was taken to a cell in Mokotów prison. A guard shot him in the back of the head. His body was thrown into a mass grave. The communists didn't even record where he was buried. Witold Pelecki, the man who voluntarily entered Auschwitz, who organized resistance in hell, who tried to save millions, was murdered by his own countrymen. For over 40 years, his story was erased. The communist government destroyed his files, banned mention of his name, and declared him a traitor. His wife and children were told nothing. They lived in fear, suspected by the regime, unable to defend Witold's memory. It wasn't until 1990, after the fall of communism, that Witold was finally exonerated. Part 10. Redemption and Legacy. The Hero Restored. In 1990, shortly after Poland regained its freedom from communist rule, Witold Pelecki's case was reviewed. He was posthumously declared innocent, rehabilitated, and recognized as a hero. In 1995, he was awarded the Order of Polonia Restituta, one of Poland's highest honors. In 2006, he was promoted posthumously to the rank of colonel. Streets, schools, and institutions across Poland were named in his honor. In 2000, Witold's full Auschwitz report was published for the first time. The world finally read his words, his testimony, his desperate pleas for action. In 2012, an English translation of his report, The Auschwitz Volunteer, Beyond Bravery, was published. Historian Norman Davies wrote, "If there was an Allied hero who deserved to be remembered and celebrated, this was a person with few peers." In 2019, Jack Fairweather published The Volunteer, the true story of the resistance hero who infiltrated Auschwitz. The book won the Costa Book Award and introduced Witold's story to millions of readers worldwide. Today, Witold Pelecki is honored throughout Poland and recognized internationally. The Witold Pelecki Institute of Solidarity and Valor in Warsaw promotes research on totalitarianism and honors those who resisted it. The Witold Pelecki International Book Award recognizes works that promote understanding of 20th century totalitarianism. But perhaps the most powerful tribute came from Poland's chief rabbi, Michael Szydryk, who wrote, "When God created the human being, God had in mind that we should all be like Captain Witold Pelecki of blessed memory." Conclusion. The meaning of Witold Pelecki. So what can we learn from the life of Witold Pelecki? First, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Witold knew Auschwitz was a death sentence, but he went anyway. Second, that one's testimony matters, even when the world refuses to listen. Witold's reports were ignored during the war, but they became crucial historical evidence of the Holocaust. Third, that honor is eternal, even when it's temporarily obscured. The communists tried to erase Witold's memory, but truth always resurfaces. And finally, that the greatest heroes are often those who sacrifice everything for others. Witold could have fled Poland. He could have stayed in the West after the war, but he chose to return, to fight for his country, knowing it would cost him his life. Witold Pelecki voluntarily entered Auschwitz. He spent 2.5 years in hell. He organized resistance in the face of absolute evil. He escaped and continued fighting. And when he was finally executed by his own country's regime, he died with honor intact. Historian Adam Sira, his biographer, said it best. Witold Pelecki was a man who saw evil, stood against it, and paid the ultimate price. But he never stopped believing that good would triumph. That is the legacy of Captain Witold Pelecki, and that is why we must never forget him. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Tomorrow we'll bring you more incredible stories of warriors whose courage changed history. Until then, remember what Witold Pelecki proved, that even in the darkest places, the human spirit can shine.